Dichotomous Sanctuary by Ashley Latursky, read by Sarah Hamblin. Persephone, that is my name. The name by which I have been known these past cold centuries. I am the heiress to the throne, the vessel through which history shall be preserved, and the light through which darkness shall prevail. Despite the efforts of the Order of St. James, I have yet to fall beneath the curse of the other realm. Even my own child has attempted to take my life. It is a lonely life to live, yet live on I must. I will not allow the pharaohs to take control of the courts. The kingdom must prevail. Reality is a passing phase, a dichotomy of the now, the future, and the past, converging upon itself in simultaneous rapture. What we perceive with our five senses, and for the lucky few, that highly acclaimed six, is merely a portion of the reality of that which has passed before us. There is no secret formula to create cause within oneself, to see things for what they really are. There is no magic key, no phrase of worth that can cause one to no longer gaze upon life with the lenses through which they view and filter information. The reality of the matter is, there is no black and white. Where once it was felt that a matter was simply put, right or wrong, no choice, no question why, no exceptions to the rule. That is not so any longer. Such an understanding is merely the delusion that some ill-witted mortal might impose upon their greater masses, in order to restrict the means of acting outside the expected norm. When the mind is entrapped by the limits of right and wrong, one cannot progress. Any such progression that may have come to fruition may be halted by the simple restriction of believing in right and wrong, by a blatant ignoring of the gray areas, the belief there is in fact black and white. There is a constant wearing between the lives we live and the existence beyond our realm. Something precious few are truly observant of, and even fewer of those who may notice such a disturbance in the balance of existences striving for equilibrium. But what happens when one, in a highly emotional state, thereby making oneself vulnerable by the state of disequilibrium and instability, enters into the state of gray? A state of half-life. A state of physically remaining in one realm, while the mind wanders in another. It happens nightly. A soul gifted with the blood and the talent to wield such a power simply fades away into the shadows, releasing the physical self over to control of another power, while ever still maintaining control as trust reigns supreme between such levels of consciousness. The shadows envelope the fading form, partaking of that substance of energy garnered by taking lives that have been stolen in the night, and to become one. It was during this very process that Persephone regained consciousness. The shadows, curling tendrils around her form as she walked forward, her gaze passing over the rose laying atop her resting place, just as she had requested be done. A hand passed over that omen, that small marker that told tale of just why she was found in this state of in-between. No sense staying around this old place, really, she murmured to herself, as she felt to be quite alone in the small sanctuary, beneath the world she knew so well. This was not altogether unknown territory for the woman. In fact, it was rather well known, just not particularly her favorite of pastimes. Truth be told, she far preferred sending a thrall with her mark upon him to complete tasks such as this. However, this time, she could not. She had to do this herself. A firm yet solemn voice replied to her words. Well, quite, causing the woman to bare her wrist in greeting. She knew not the power which had spoken to her, in reply to her own voiced thoughts. However, she did take great solace in the fact he had only replied to that which had been spoken, and not that which dwelt within the mind. It meant her shields were well in place. It meant, at least for now, she was safe. "Who goes there?" The command spoken in a firm voice, though within perhaps it was not so firm an emotion as she might have expressed. It was an ever-present concern, just when the next attempt to steal her kingdom would come. My, Lady Persephone, is that really any way to greet me? You've cheated me once, and yet it seems here you have come running back into my arms. Were the hands of the serpent too much for you? Would you rather trust your fate in giving me what was rightfully my own? The voice was familiar, yet she couldn't seem to properly place it until those words passed wanton lips. Though one may not even describe them as lips, that lifeless form, waving and waning through the atmosphere. The form, roughly a foot taller than her own stature, stood erect, posture like that of her own, the posture of a strong creature, unmoved by the world which did surround it. Though one may wonder if its feet even touched the floor. So long were the robes that covered the form of the male before her, robes of darkest red velvet. Flowing through the air, the shadows danced around the creature to music unseen and unheard. Amethyst locks trailed upon the floor, creating a train behind him over those long velvet robes. Dark tendrils waltzed around the creature. She had once believed this creature to be the Prince of Darkness, the morning star, Lucifer himself. Instead, she had made a deal with a demon. Powerful, yes, but not the prince as she had believed. As the male walked around her, circling her as if a predator stalking his prey, she spoke. I know very well the words I spoke, the oath I gave. The only words she had the power to speak in truth, for his power over her was palpable. She could taste him in the air. His hands lay outstretched, reaching towards her with pools of crimson blood overflowing onto the ground before her. His eyes shone with a green envy towards her, through the hair that hid his facial features from view. You know why I have come, Persephone. And in that moment, she could feel the warm liquid pouring over her own hands. Gaze fell upon those pale fingers, only to see that very same blood pouring over her own hands, staining what was once white as snow, crimson. She could smell it, almost as soon as the feeling and sight registered upon her senses. It was the blood of her predecessor, whom she had slain beneath the city's streets. It was the blood shed within that small room filled with noxious fumes. It had been necessary. It hadn't even fully been her deed. The woman had made a foolish decision. She had turned away while the blade was still firmly against her neck. Sure, she had killed many in the city, but this one had struck her strangely, had changed her. Perhaps for the better, perhaps for the worse. Time would tell, but the effect was there. To make a deal with the devil, one is brought before the crossroads both symbolically and quite literally so. Even now, as she conversed with this first, whom she had communed with, she could feel his mark upon her burning with recognition. It was not some mere blood binding that had sealed Christopher to her. It was a binding of the very energies of which she consisted, the very energy that made her who she was, beyond the embrace of the same queen curse. Christopher's very existence was tied to her own, much as she imagined her own was tied with his after the years that they had remained in such a state. A wrinkle of that strong nose, she could almost taste upon the air, the blood changing before her as it poured over the male's hands. That scent, so familiar, so like her own, yet younger. It took her but a few moments' time to recognize the scent of her own despised and now embraced twin sister, now known by the name she took of choice. Idiom. The remnant of the woman's image played behind closed eyelids, slanted green eyes that lack any white, violet hair, tall with a slight build. Her skin is white, but the blood flowing beneath it actually seemed to glow with a black light. Finger and toenails can extend into claws, though her fingers themselves closely resemble talons. Her mouth filled with prominent fangs. Idiom. The name slipped from parched lips. Scenes flashed before her eyes. Nights spent ridiculing the woman, shaming her name, taunting, torturing by words if not actions, denying the woman that which was her own by right, acceptance. Never again would Persephone allow the blood of suffering from one who was worthy to be upon her own hands. That is not to say that the blood of the unworthy would not be welcome to mar pristine flesh of ivory and bone. She had allowed envy to jade her sight of the woman, had allowed that emotional lens to falter judgment for far too long. The wondering. It was the wondering that got to her. What had Idiom meant by her apology? I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you like that. What did you do, Idiom? What did you not mean to do? Apparently, it doesn't matter. Not anymore. It had mattered. It had mattered far more than she had let the girl see. More so, in fact, than she had known herself at the time. She watched as the internal dialogue played itself across the void before her, a void she had just come to focus upon, having been quite distracted from really seeing it by the voice and personage to which it did belong. Flat, like a desert abandoned to the elements, the wind bearing down so as to cut away any shape that might have remained to loom across the barren visage. It would have almost been too perfectly cliché had a rogue tumbleweed blown across in those moments. Shadows danced around, wisps and wills pirouetting across a stage of desolation. Two images of herself, effectively her own id and ego, fighting against one another. The id acting on instinct, crying out to appeal, acting in self-preservation on instinct, releasing itself to pure passion. Like it doesn't matter. I was right. I knew it. She is the reason. I should have seen it coming. Oh, wait. I did. I saw it coming that night he brought her home. The ego, speaking in a voice of reason, putting an effective stop to those rampant thoughts fueled by paranoia. Tear-stung eyes that once held firm. She had reached out to catch it, to try and salvage the illusion as it fell, to cradle it in her embrace, that perhaps in doing so she might undo the pain caused. But it had been too late, and in that she had failed. In that failure, eyes rose to meet those of the being who graced her with his presence. You fraud. Oh, come now, Persephone. Did you truly expect anything less? Did you really believe all that has come to pass was not without cause? That it was not consequence for your actions? I believe the term is known as karma. What so many of you fools who call our kind to the crossroads never seem to take into account is there is no way to escape consequences. For every choice, there is an equal and opposite consequence. You chose your consequence. You bargained your very soul for a greater measure of the power you already possessed. Did you truly think you had denied the devil his due by some vampire's embrace? Did you truly think to cheat your word? Fool. She could see it all, how his hand was evident in the failings of her relationship, in the distance which had evolved into a chasm of perhaps unforgivable means. Falling to her knees, she began to gather the pieces of that shattered frame and glass, sweeping the minuscule remnants of a past never to be forgotten, still treasured in her heart of hearts, no matter what she might display in the means of that emotionless mask. Shards pierced that pristine flesh, crimson staining fingers suited towards gentler arts, such as playing the piano. Soft pads soon were littered by scarring slivers of glass as movements trumped thought, in desperation to gather all the pieces that scattered around her. That designer suit, wrinkled, the knees nigh worn through to bloodied shard-bitten flesh. Nails claw against the riddled flesh, frantically trying to tear the slivers from previously perfected cream of flesh over joint. Perhaps, she thought, perhaps if she gathered every piece, should she puzzle them all together once more, healing would begin. All that had been shown to be naught but silver gossamer lining over what had become a nightmare of epic proportions. She continued, her attention focused solely as she missed his departure from her. He had done his work. He had had his say, and for the now, he would leave her to pick up the pieces, leave her to assemble that which was left, to see what was lost might never heal, and that those marks would forever belong to her. Those bites against pristine flesh would leave a marring upon the psyche, if not the flesh itself. Never again would she take for granted that which she held in her grasp, what she had earned, and that which she had been handed upon that silver platter of entitlement, of privilege. In no soon time, she felt the darkness swallow her, felt the emptiness of the room, the void of all but her own self expand to her surroundings. It seemed the more she tried to pick up the pieces, the more she found them deeply rooted within her flesh, even as fingernails had drug into the very skin of her knees, regardless of possible further damage. She had come to realize it was no use. There was nothing she could do. And with that reckoning, she collapsed upon the cold, solid ground, letting her form embrace the firm, her skin embrace the biting slivers of glass that burrowed into pristine perfection, the slivers of wood piercing whatever skin they might come into contact. And she sobbed. She grieved. Upon that scattered remnant of yesterdays, so beloved and encircled within the heart of hearts, she faced that which she had denied, faced the emotions which lay within that had been so long neglected. White-hot skin covered the hands that held her, that grasped her shoulders, that burned her skin. Darkness, thick and palatable, held her within its embrace, encircling her with a thick, choking fog of shadows, unlike any she had known before. Heels dug into the ground to no avail, the marble unwilling to break to hold her in place as the being with white, luminous skin dragged her towards the center of the darkness. Pain streamed through her blood, eliciting nerve endings pleading with her to scream in agony as the burn ran deeper into her skin and muscle tissue. The tearing of muscles, bone, and sinew within her as she felt four creatures taking hold of her, pulling her in all four directions. A force beyond her own experience bound her tongue, constricting her throat so as not to allow her speech, nor to cry out for mercy. Claws bit into once pristine flesh, the epitome of perfection personified in her, now marred by the bite of fire and light. Hands covered her face, intent upon preserving at least those features most dear to her. Perhaps a mark of vanity, perhaps an action of narcissistic value. Yet if one were to reflect what was the woman known by, was it not her face, her features of perfection? The very power that radiated around her like an aura of darkness, the shadows congregating to her person, blessing her as one of the chosen dark. And then, at once, the suffocating darkness, the blinding burning light, was gone. There was but a woman before her, clad in robes of shadow and ash, hair white as snow, cascading down her back. A woman with a voice that echoed through the hall, melodic, yet haunting as it struck her ears. As the stars glittered, trying to keep the alder and the oak from spilling the secrets, the whisper among the sentient air does whisper to 3, a triumvirate of sorts, that your dreams would lend themselves to simple adoration and gentle diatribe. However, as the pitch shades devour the horizon and refuses to wither the grasp upon the spellbound night, it would not appear as Macroby, as perhaps a glimmer of sinister in the mold of the awakening, nectars to partake of which render bitter and acrid. Tell me, dear Lady Persephone, would-be Shadow Slayer, what Macroby mysteries do you hold within your heart of hearts? What is it that makes that time tick forward, the waves of the Styx to wash over, and that which causes you to remain away from the slumber which might claim you, her prisoner and lover? She paused for a moment, reflecting upon that which might be learned in this place, in this time, before she might answer. It was a test of sorts, this she knew, though of what she knew not. A guessing game of sorts indeed. Are we not ever changing? There are some who suffer from stagnation, yes, as will there ever be. However, most who might remain, we progress. If is the only way not to be left behind as time marches forward, taking her lovers into her dark embrace. I have tasted time. I have taken drink from her sweet nectar. I have allowed the waters of the Styx, the 5 rivers, even to mold me within their embrace of silk and flame. It changes the way one might perceive the world. Her sister's voice overcame that of the now lost visage. And yet, you believe yourself sinless. You believe that you shall take the crown and hold the kingdom without end. You selfish beast, you feral, you disgust me. It sickens me to know that we share blood. As long as I live, you will never have the kingdom. Persephone hardly knew what took control of her, as the dagger from her side was drawn and embedded into her sister's throat. The kingdom would be hers. It was her destiny. It belonged to her, and her alone. She would not share it with a woman who had grasped at her curtails even in birth. Blind rage tore the blade in a circular motion. A feral scream curdling in the air as the woman's head fell to the floor. It is done, she stated, knowing that now the kingdom would be hers, and hers alone. She would rule the shadows, and none now could claim the throne, save her. None could prevent her from waging war against the Necroratus,